The long-term view tries to address the broader question of what adolescence is for. But of course, no adolescent is consciously thinking about their evolutionary past at the moment they decide to run a red light or when they feel the pang of being excluded from the coolest party. So we also need a short-term answer as well. Although our brains are approximately 90% of their adult size by age 6, the brain continues to undergo significant changes throughout adolescence. When calculating risk and reward from the moment to moment, regions of the brain are talking to one another, responding to reward, anticipating reward, inhibiting impulses, and regulating behaviors. Thanks to the work of neuropsychologists like B.J. Casey, Cat Sebastian, and others, we now understand that these systems are more unbalanced in adolescence compared with younger children or older adults. Casey et al. 2011. Sebastian et al. 2008. The systems responsible for reward and motivation mature earlier, are more well connected to other areas of the brain, and shout louder than the systems that suppress inappropriate actions and plan for the future. This is especially true in the heat of passion, in the presence of peers, in the spur of the moment, or in unfamiliar situations. Rayner and Farley, 2006. There is another factor that helps to amplify this imbalance, a chemical messenger in the brain called dopamine. Responsible for making us feel good, rewarding us for certain behaviors like doing something new. Compared to children and adults, the baseline level of dopamine in adolescence is set at a lower level. But when it is released, there is more of it. Steinberg, 2008. Put simply, this means adolescents have a greater motivation to seek out new experiences because they have a lower dopamine baseline, and they get a greater kick out of it when they do because of the higher amount of dopamine released. The downside of this is that when dopamine levels crash, teens get more easily bored and need higher levels of novelty for the same dopamine kick. This drives adolescents to seek change and novelty and to push for an unfamiliar and uncertain, which is what they must do if they are ever going to get out of the house. Siegel, 2014. Indeed, adolescents need informative but non-lethal experiences of risk to prepare them for later life. For instance, risk is part of becoming an astronaut, downhill skier, or business entrepreneur, as well a criminal, a drug dealer, or reckless driver. In summary, adolescents do not underestimate risk and are capable of making rational decisions, but they are more likely to overestimate rewards, or rather to find rewards more rewarding than adults do. The immediate gratification promised by fast driving, heavy drinking, or unprotected sex is far greater than a measured calculation of their long-term consequences. Key point: the reward system of the brain mature earlier and are more well connected in adolescence than those that keep impulses in check and that deliberate over alternative choices. When combined, these long and short-term views help us better understand adolescent decision-making. In the long term, to reach adult milestones of independence, we need the cooperation of our peer group. In the short term, this is motivated by changes in the structure and function of the brain that push us away from the family and pull us towards our friends. As a result, adolescents start to focus on the positive, thrilling aspects of choice and minimize the negative, dangerous aspects. There are two further important subtleties to this general picture. First, a lot of risk taking occurs during adolescence, but not all adolescents are risk takers, and we do not fully understand the reason for all individual differences. One possibility is that the neural systems underlying risky behavior functions slightly different or matured according to different schedules from one teenager to the next. In support of this, researchers have demonstrated that those adolescents who are likely to engage in life-threatening activities in real life also show larger responses to monetary rewards in reward-related neutral circuits of the brain. Galvin et al. 2008. Second, there are some contexts that are much more likely to cause risk-taking than others, a significant one being the presence of other peers, which is explored further in the next section, 13.2. Peer influence on risk-taking. One of the hallmarks of risk-taking in adolescence are opposed to risk-taking in any other phase of life, in that it is as much more likely to occur in the presence of peers. For example, one of the best predictors, if not the single best predictor, of whether an adolescent is engaged in substance abuse or crime is whether they have a friend who has also engaged in those activities. Jason et al. 2009. Zimring, 1998. Jason Sheen and his colleagues set out to investigate whether their peer influence extends to driving, an activity that already know is particularly risky for adolescents. They designed a simulated computer driving game, which was played by 40 adolescents, young adults and adults. Cheen et al. 2011. In each run of the game, participants attempted to reach the end of a straight track as quickly as possible. There were 20 junctions on the track where participants could either stop the vehicle, stop or take a risk, and run the traffic lights. Go figure 13.3. If participants chose to run the lights, they were fortunate enough not to crash. They could complete the game quicker than if they had stopped. If participants were unlucky and crashed, they would be slower than if they had stopped. Crucially, each of the participants played the game under two different conditions, one in which they drove alone and one in which they were being watched by two similar aged friends they had brought along to the experiment. Cheen and colleagues found no difference between adolescents and older participants in how risky their driving decisions were, or how many crashes they had when they were driving alone. This is remarkable given that car accidents account for nearly half of all fatalities among American youth. Blum and Nelson, Mamre, 2004. However, when being observed by their friends, adolescents had significantly more crashes. By contrast, older adults crashed no more, no less, when they were being watched by others, and their overall level of risk was the same as if they were driving alone. Cheen and colleagues also ran the same experiment while participants played the game inside a functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRI scanner, so that the researcher could explore the role of reward and inhibition brain systems we met earlier. As predicted, they found that the brain regions associated reward and in elevation showed greater activation for adolescents, but only when they were being watched by their friends, and as before, older adults showed no such difference. This study and similar other powerfully demonstrate the role that peers play in adolescent risk-taking behavior. Furthermore, in the Chin et al. Study, peers were located in a separate room and were prevented from directly interacting with participants during the driving game. This means adolescents were more likely to take risks when merely knowing that they were being watched by friends. And so this behavior was not due to any direct peer pressure. Similarly, researchers have also shown that adolescents are more likely to be sexually active when they believe that their friends are sexually active, whether or not their friends actually are. Bab Aloha, 2004. As we have seen everywhere in child development, aspects of our. I just want to add, if you're grandstanding in front of a stadium, whether you know them or not, whether they're your friends or your peers, you increase your performance and show off more. That is the rubbishest study I've ever seen, and very proper, But psychological makeup, such as risk taking, are filtered through societal attitudes and beliefs. This means that the same underlying tendency can be expressed differently from society to society. For example, condoms and comprehensive sex education are widely available to Swedish adolescents, but not to those in the USA. These population level attitudes can affect individual level risk evolution. Teen birth rates are 5.9 per thousand in Sweden, compared with 41.9 per thousand in the USA. The rates of sexually transmitted diseases are between 10 and 300 times higher in the USA. United Nations Statistics Division 2006. Key point: knowing or believing that peers are observing their behavior significantly increases the risk-taking behavior of adolescents, even in the abundance of any direct peer pressure. And in my opinion, anybody in front of somebody, doesn't matter if they're your enemy, it doesn't matter if you don't know them, it doesn't matter if you're friends, you're going to show off, you're going to perform better. I think we can do another one. In terms of risk and reward, peer influence has come across in a rather bad light so far. However, peers are important sources of social capital for one another during adolescence and act as buffers in stressful times, not to mention offering fun and companionship. Recent research has begun to rehabilitate the image of peer influence, exploring the social circumstances in which peers can positively influence one another. So I'm not saying their study's wrong, because it's not wrong, but it is misleading. It's the fact that, if you're in front of somebody, you do things better. Not the fact that adolescents do things because they're in front of their mates. Lucas Mollerman and his colleagues designed a set of experimental games to be played by 146 adolescents in 2022. The first game tested rule compliance and was very similar to the earlier driving experiment. Participants had to decide whether to follow or break the rule, wait until the traffic lights turns green, before moving forward. The key difference was what happened next. Whatever the adolescents chose, they were then informed that a peer had chosen the opposite. Participants who initially complied with the rules, i.e., moved after the traffic lights turned green, were shown 3 bad examples of peers who moved as soon as possible. Participants who initially broke the rule, i.e., moved before the traffic light turned green, were then shown 3 good examples of peers who waited until the traffic light turned green. The participants were then asked to play the game again. The crucial question for the researchers was, how much would adolescents be influenced by the good examples versus the bad examples of their peers? The second of their games tested how much adolescents could be swayed by what other peers believed. To test this, the researchers devised a task in which participants looked at an image of 50 to 60 animals and had to estimate how many there were. They were then shown how many animals other peers had estimated, and as before, encouraged to play the game again. The crucial question was, how would the adolescents be influenced by the estimate of their peers? This task taps into our ability to learn from others, Chapter 5, and our bias to conform with the norms of the young group, Chapter 7 and 8. Finally, the researchers gave adolescents a version of the dictator game, and have already met in section 11.3, Ibbotson 2014. Participants received 10 points, worth about €1, to divide between themselves and another person who had participated in the previous session. After they had played the game once, they were informed how a peer had performed in the same task. Either they were told that the peer had chosen a selfish split, keeping all the points, or they had split it more equally, sharing the points 50-50. The crucial question was, how much would adolescents be influenced by the sharing behavior of their peers? So what did they find? The title of the paper summed up the results: social influence in adolescence as a double-edged sword. Adolescents who had seen other peers break the rules were more likely to break the rules, and those who had seen selfish splitting of points were more likely to be selfish. However, those who had seen other peers comply with the rules were more likely to comply with the rules, and those who had seen more generous sharing were more likely to be more generous. There was an interesting secondary result too, across all the tasks they used. Rule compliance, belief formation, and prosociality. Peer influence steadily declined throughout the adolescence. The youngest of the participants was around 10, while the oldest were about 20. Those closer to 10 years of age were more susceptible to the influence of peers for the good and bad than adolescents closer to 20 years old. This might be because the older adolescents had stronger identity of who they are, making them less likely to be influenced by peers. In the previous chapter, we explored how this openness to new ideas can put teens in the driving seat of social change. In the context of peer groups, younger adolescents with a more fragile self-identity and less certainty about their personal values take more of their cues from the group about what is the right thing to do. Writer et al. 2019. Key point: the behaviour of early adolescence is strongly guided by social environment, both for positive and negative outcomes. I think that other one is quite misleading as well, because obviously, if somebody's not going to share with you, you're not going to share with them. It's not influence. It's just treating people as they treat you, unless you're a good Christian, which you do good to them who need it most.